One of the most persistent themes I emphasize in my leadership sessions is that true authority does not arrive with a business card or a formal title. Instead, leadership is ignited the exact moment you decide to accept responsibility for something greater than your own personal checklist. There is a profound psychological boundary that separates a traditional worker from a visionary leader, and it isn't found in their daily activities. It is found in their mental orientation. A worker typically waits for instructions, asking, "Tell me what my next task is," while a leader proactively investigates, asking, "What must be accomplished for us to succeed?" This single shift in perspective alters the entire trajectory of a career. While the worker is buried in the details of the task, the leader is absorbed in the significance of the outcome. One is trying to finish a job. The other is trying to define why the job matters in the first place. In the early stages of my own journey, I fell into a common trap. I believed that sheer, unadulterated hard work was the primary engine of wealth. I dedicated myself to long hours, followed every protocol to the letter, and fulfilled every obligation. However, I eventually realized a startling truth. I was working incredibly hard within a system, but I was failing to work on the system. I was generating results, but I wasn't providing any real direction. Many people spend their entire lives in this trap, mistaking constant motion for actual leadership. Leadership, however, is born in the clarity of thought. It isn't about having power over people. It is about having a clear vision of the path ahead. The primary question shouldn't be, how can I check everything off my list? But rather, what are the vital priorities, and why do they take precedence? The worker's primary metric is efficiency, doing things right. The leader's primary metric is effectiveness, doing the right things. It is the difference between someone who spends their day polishing a ladder and someone who pauses to ensure that the ladder is actually leaning against the correct wall. If you operate with a worker's mindset, you become perpetually dependent on external direction. You wait for the assignment, the order, or the manual. But if you adopt a leader's mindset, you become the generator of direction. You establish the tone, dictate the priorities, and carry the weight of the vision in your mind long before it ever manifests in a physical report. This is where real responsibility begins. It isn't just about performance, it's about purpose. A worker is satisfied saying, "I finished my assigned part," but a leader asks, "Did my contribution actually move the needle toward our ultimate objective?" This distinction is what separates mere management from a genuine movement. While anyone can exert physical effort, not everyone is willing to engage in the difficult labor of deep thinking. Leadership thinking requires mental space, quiet reflection, and the audacity to challenge the status quo. It involves looking past the safety of a familiar routine and questioning the point of all that effort. When you start thinking like a leader, you stop being a tenant of your results and start being the owner of them. You stop pointing fingers at external circumstances and start taking ownership of your environment. You stop waiting for a door to open and start building the door yourself. Leadership is a decision you make internally long before anyone recognizes it externally. You aren't promoted into leadership, you grow into it. A promotion is simply the world acknowledging the growth that has already occurred in your mind. Workers measure their success by the clock. Leaders measure it by their impact. Workers strive to stay busy. Leaders strive to be valuable. It is this specific shift in perspective that transforms standard performance into legendary achievement. The foundation of leadership is built the day you accept that your future is your own responsibility. It doesn't belong to your employer, your boss, or the economy. It belongs to you. Once this realization takes root, your behavior shifts instinctively. You no longer show up just to punch a clock. You show up to make a dent in the universe. Before you can ever hope to guide others, you must first learn to guide the currents of your own thoughts. This difference in vision can be described quite simply. Workers see the fragment, while leaders see the whole. When you think like a worker, your world is restricted to the boundaries of your specific assignment. You focus on your shift, your specific report, or your individual quota. You evaluate your success based on what is directly in front of you. But when you adopt the eyes of a leader, you gain elevation. You begin to understand how your specific contribution interacts with every other moving part. You see how a minor decision in one department creates a ripple effect across 10 different results elsewhere. You start to see the entire web rather than just a single thread. Perspective is what creates purpose. Without it, even the most productive work can feel hollow and draining. This is why many people lose their passion. They are busy, but they have no idea where their effort fits into the larger puzzle. A leader understands the context. They see the flow of the entire operation, not just the isolated fragments. While the worker asks about their specific duties, the leader asks how those duties serve the overarching mission. There is a famous story of two laborers working on a construction site. When asked what they were doing, the first replied that he was simply stacking bricks. The second, however, answered with a spark in his eye, stating that he was building a magnificent cathedral. They were performing the exact same physical task with the exact same tools, but their mentalities were worlds apart. One saw monotonous labor, the other saw a lasting legacy. This is precisely what happens when you decide to see the bigger picture. You attach a deeper meaning to your daily motions, and that meaning fundamentally changes the quality of your performance. When people understand why their work matters, they operate with a higher level of care, consistency, and pride. Leaders are the ones who bring this awareness into everything they touch. They serve as a constant reminder of the why behind the routine. While a worker worries about finishing the task, a leader worries about fulfilling the purpose. This is also why leaders naturally think further into the future. They are constantly asking questions that bridge the present to the potential. They ask, how does this current project connect to our long-term goals? Who will benefit from this decision 5 years from now? Most people rarely look up from their work long enough to see where they are headed because they are too preoccupied with the immediate steps beneath their feet. Leadership, however, demands that you maintain a dual perspective. You must keep an eye on the details of the present while simultaneously keeping your gaze on the horizon. You cannot effectively guide a team if your vision is limited to a daily checklist. This is why vision is the primary requirement of leadership. It isn't just about eyesight, it's about insight, the ability to perceive patterns, connections, and opportunities that others haven't noticed yet. When you develop this level of vision, your decision-making improves. It's not necessarily because you've become more intelligent, but because you are viewing life from a higher floor. Leaders climb the mental stairs. They don't stay grounded in the mud of immediate circumstances. From that elevated vantage point, they can provide clarity to their team and say, this is our destination, and it makes sense because they've seen the broader landscape. Workers often mistake activity for progress. They see a step in front of them and take it, but they never stop to ask if the staircase actually leads somewhere worthwhile. A leader is the one who steps back, studies the map, and chooses the path that aligns with the ultimate purpose. It's never about doing more work. It's about doing the work that matters most. And the only way to identify what matters is to see the whole picture. This leads us to another sharp divide between the worker and the leader: the pursuit of growth versus the pursuit of goals. A worker typically thinks in terms of completion, meeting the deadline, hitting the quota, or just getting it done. A leader, however, thinks in terms of capacity. They see every task as an opportunity to become stronger, wiser, and more capable. For the worker, the finish line is the end of the effort. For the leader, the finish line is just the starting point for the next level of development. Every challenge carries two distinct rewards. The first is the external result you achieve, but the second, and more important, is the internal person you become in the process. I recall a man who complained that he had hit every sales target his company set for him, yet he remained stuck in the same position for years. He failed to realize that hitting targets doesn't earn you a promotion. Growth does. You can meet every objective and still be the same person you were a year ago. Leadership requires you to ask a different question. Not just did I finish this, but how did I grow through it? When you think like a worker, you are focused on building a resume. When you think like a leader, you are focused on building a foundation. A resume is just a list of past deeds, but a foundation is what supports your future potential. Every goal you set should stretch you beyond your current comfort zone. Easy goals might create effort, but only difficult goals create evolution. The worker asks, "Can I get this done?" While the leader asks, "What will this require me to become?" Growth doesn't always come from winning. It often comes from the struggle of losing. A worker sees failure as a devastating setback, but a leader sees it as essential feedback. This is why leaders recover so much faster. They extract the lesson and immediately reinvest it into their next attempt. While a worker finishes a project and looks for a place to rest, a leader finishes a project and looks for a moment of reflection. They analyze what went right and what could be improved. This process of constant review is what builds professional maturity. When you align your thinking with growth, goals become checkpoints rather than endpoints. You start to measure your life not by the trophies you've collected, but by the transformation you've undergone. You become more patient, more strategic, and more consistent. It is the compound interest of leadership, steady growth, that multiplies over time. Always remember that your external achievements will always follow your internal development. If you only focus on the goal, you might get lucky once. But if you focus on growth, you will eventually hit every goal that aligns with your evolution. This is why a true leader never claims to have arrived. They understand that there is always another level of discipline, skill, and understanding to reach. Don't mistake being busy for being better. Leadership demands that you learn from every meeting, every mistake, and every challenge. When you outgrow your circumstances, new opportunities will begin to seek you out. The worker chases completion, but the leader chases capacity. The final distinction between a worker and a leader lies in the transition from labor to leverage. A worker often believes that someone else should fix the problems or provide the guidance, but a leader decides to become the solution. This transformation from dependence to direction is not a sudden event. It is a temperament you cultivate every single day. It happens when you stop asking for permission to excel and start taking ownership of your habits, your time, and your attitude. You realize that you don't need a promotion to begin leading. You only need a decision. This shift changes your entire approach to responsibility. While workers manage their own small piece of the puzzle, leaders take responsibility for the entire picture. They move from reaction to creation, designing their circumstances rather than merely responding to them. They understand that leadership is a lifestyle, not an act you perform during office hours. It is a mindset that says, if I can think better, I can serve better. Once you embrace this, the most ordinary tasks become meaningful investments in your future. You stop counting the hours you put in and start measuring the impact you leave behind. Real leadership is ultimately earned through the example you set. While authority might get people to comply for a short time, it is your personal influence and integrity that earn their commitment for a lifetime. You cannot inspire discipline in others if you are not first disciplined with yourself. You cannot expect respect if you do not respect your own commitments. Self-leadership is the foundation upon which all other leadership is built. It shows up in the quiet moments, how you manage your schedule, how you handle stress, and how you stay centered when others panic. As you move forward, remember that leaders are not born. They are built through consistent thought, intentional choices, and disciplined habits. They trade motion for meaning and reaction for responsibility. When your thinking rises to this higher level, your results and your life will eventually follow. The path from worker to leader is open to anyone willing to change how they think. So, ask yourself today, are you merely filling time, or are you fulfilling a purpose? The shift starts now.